It's the Backyard Barbecue Podcast. Welcome to episode 1. We're here with my friend of mine, a friend of yours, Luke Schultz. Everybody give it up for Luke. Woo! And Luke, while you're here, I think the people listening to this podcast probably know you, since this is a small podcast. I have no audience, and the people listening are just people who are my friends enough to listen to my podcast. I want to talk about the decisions, the big decisions.
Big decisions.
The decisions you make as you leave high school and all of a sudden have these pressures on you. And Luke and I have talked plenty about these types of decisions, and Luke has had a go of it, deciding what to do with his little life. His big life. I'm sorry, that was rude.
It's okay.
Small life is what you have, Luke.
Most of it's in front of me, yet to come, so you can count this as a little life.
Yeah. How much life do you have left to live, first of all?
I'd like to think at least 60 more years. That's being optimistic, but
it is optimistic.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are you gonna do with them? That's the big question.
That's the kicker.
Why don't you start with
what am I doing?
What are you doing now, and versus what did you think you wanted to do as early as you can remember?
Okay. Currently, I'm studying to be a teacher in an elementary school somewhere. And that's only been a recent development within the last 2 years. Yeah, something like that. It never really, crossed my mind until I actually got to college that maybe I want to be a teacher. Before that, I had in my mind that I wanted to be a pastor, but quickly found out that it wasn't for me. My first semester freshman year. Before that, I'm not sure. In grade school, I never really had anything that I was like, I want to do this. It's kind of just been like, you'd be a good pastor. You should be a pastor. And it's been that nudge, that gradual shove towards that direction. And it's not a bad thing. I was just a kid who didn't really have any experiences to go off of. So that's kind of where I ended up. And as of right now, I'm pretty content being on this track of soon-to-be teacher. Very little experience actually teaching under my belt, but I'm looking forward to getting more of a chance to do that coming up, I guess, and seeing if this is actually something that I'm like, yeah, I want to be doing this for at least another year or 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to what you said about people nudging you in the direction of you could be a good pastor, because I was at Bible study in St. Peter with our good friend Jonas, and he just spoke in Bible study, and the pastor Kelly in St. Peter said, young man, in front of everyone, young man, you would make a good teacher, the way you express your thoughts. And it just made me think, do any other professions besides pastors and teachers get, at least in our background, you went to Luther Prep, I went to Luther High School, do other professions get that same, does it happen the same way? I don't think
yeah, I don't know.
What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't heard anyone have a story like, yeah, I was just talking with one of my friends or talking with a teacher, and they were like, you know what, you'd be a good nurse.
Yeah, I think
Like,
it could happen.
It could, but like, out of just by, I guess it's the profession itself. Like,
I think nurse is a bad example because that might be the only other one I can think of.
I was gonna say doctor.
Yeah,
that's good too.
They're basic ones.
Yeah. You'd be a good fighter jet airplane person. You'd be a good fighter jet.
You'd be a good fighter jet. I wish my pastor would have told me that when I was young.
My sister, when she was really little, when my parents asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up, she responded, "I'll be a football." That's my oldest sister. When she was really little, that's a running joke in my family still, though. But yeah,
Wow.
You'd make a good football.
Wow.
I feel like that's a backhanded compliment. You know?
Yeah.
More of an insult
That's
than a compliment.
You'd make a good football. You should use that in your kids someday in the classroom.
Oh yeah.
Another thing I want to go back to, which I think is a good kind of catalyst for getting into what I want to talk with you, which we are talking about, like the decision making that you have to do quickly. It seems like when you get to college or are starting to think about college, and everybody our age has some sort of story about how they've arrived where they are. But I hear this a lot, and you mentioned it in your stories. It wasn't for me. Where you had, could you go into that a little bit more about what do you mean when you say that pastoral track wasn't for you, or like how that came about that you would say that?
I don't know. A lot of it was kind of just like I had been told that this is what you should be doing, because of what you're good at, the way that you speak, the way that you interact with people, and getting behind the like skills of what a pastor needs to like learn before he becomes a pastor, which is like languages and like being able to counsel adults on very serious things. Part of it was like, that seems like a lot of work, but like that's not the deterring factor. The deterring factor is just like, that doesn't sound enjoyable to me.
And by that you mean?
It doesn't, I don't want, I wouldn't mind doing it, but I don't want to do that for my career. And I think that there are other things that I could be better at. And it's not that I don't want to be a pastor. Like, I could see it happening at some point, potentially. Maybe.
Right.
But it's not like, I don't have a very strong desire to do it.
I don't think that's how you're supposed to feel about it when you're
if like if
you're calling, you might not feel
right,
like
exactly.
No, maybe I'll do it someday. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were starting out, I was almost gonna come at you with, because you were talking about how like the languages and the classes, and in my experience coming from a school that's not a pastor teacher training school, a lot of times when someone says that a career quote unquote isn't for them, or a career path that they're taking in school isn't for them, you hear, I didn't like the classes, I didn't like the profs,
The work was too hard.
I didn't like the works.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that you're thinking about the career and what you like, where you want to go with it, because that is like that's the process, right? It is being able to look into your future. How far can you look ahead and decide? Like just before we recorded this podcast, we're at Kwik Trip right now, and we were going in and we were talking about looking into the future, and how if you look 10 years in the future, right, you can maybe be less stressed out about what's going on today, because 10 years in the future, well, what are you going to remember? What are you going to think about?
Right.
And also 10 years, if you look 10 years in the future, you're going to be thinking, you might think now, how can I position myself to be happy 10 years into the future? And that's hard stuff.
Yeah.
It takes a long time. Yeah. Like how far do you think your vision extends into the future, and when do you think you started looking, like trying to project your own thoughts into the future and decide what would be the best move for you?
I've since
Starting with how far do you think you can look ahead right now and actually analyze how you're going to feel?
oh, yikes. Everything changes yearly.
Yep.
Almost.
Do you feel like how, do you think you're in touch with Luke Schultz of 2022?
Not personally, I guess.
You haven't met him?
I haven't met him. Not yet.
You never will. He'll eat you.
That's true.
He will eat.
He will become me. I will become him.
Which is true.
Which is factual.
Which one is which though?
I don't know. We'll find out.
Do you become your future self? Or does your future self become you? Everybody listening right now, I want you to pause this podcast and take a deep breath and think about that question. Do you become your future self, or does your future self become you?
All right.
Anyways, continue.
Since about 8th grade and this whole thing that I'm going to be talking about has changed since 8th grade, just here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But I put into place in my mind this 5-year plan, where it's what can you put in, like, put in the time for 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and after that 5 years, reevaluate what you're doing.
Love it.
And then the next 5 years, reevaluate what you're doing. So,
and when did you come up with that?
It was about 8th grade. My thought was, I'm going to a new school where I don't have anyone that I know, and I have to spend, well, I'd have to spend 4 years there. But I also transferred schools from 7th to 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the 5-year, because I knew I'd be going to a different school where I didn't know anyone 2 times in that 5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So 8th grade, then freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, that's the 5 years. After that, reevaluate. Where was I at? And I did a terrible job of reevaluating where I was.
Before you go on, what do you look at those 5 years and say, this is what I'm gonna, like, when I think of a 5-year plan, I think you're gonna stick with something for 5 years. What are you sticking with, or what is that? What are you doing in those 5 years?
My big thing, my 12 to 13-year-old brain at that time, was like, make friends, be positive, try to be popular if you can, just be funny, be fun, have friends, have fun. That's kind of like, that's where my mindset was there, and it wasn't really like anything about life in general.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's been changing. It was like, what are you gonna do in the next 5 years? Someone had asked me at church, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I was just like, oh, I don't know. That's a weird thing to think about.
So you're saying you're not going to think about where you need to be in 5 years for 5 years, or that I said that wrong. You're not going to think about it for 5 years? Is that reading? You're spending 5 years just kind of living life?
No.
This is very complex.
It's
theory for a 7th grader.
You're right. Back then, I didn't have all this, like, I didn't put much stock into it.
Mm-hmm.
I just said it one time, and then it just so happened senior year I was really stressed out, and I remembered it. Looking back at those first 5 years, and like freshman year of college is really when it like started becoming more of a I'm going to stick with this potentially for 5 years, and it's like changed I've failed multiple times for like that 5-year plan sort of thing. But I guess looking at it now, I guess it's not really a 5-year plan. It's be aware of what's happening in those 5 years and think about that in the past and think about what you want in the future, and like where's your mindset at? Is it time to change something, I guess, in a way that will be noticeable within the next 5 years?
Mm.
Or is it time to be like, okay, I'm good where I'm at? And if I were to apply this 5-year thing to maybe teaching, it's get through 5 years of teaching. If I love it, I'll stick to it. If I'm not liking it at all, then at that point, 5 years into my teaching career, I should have most bills paid off. I should be in a fine financial state.
Mm-hmm.
So leaving that job and looking for something else to do isn't out of the picture.
So that's your plan now. Would you say that is like that's your plan?
I'd like to say that's my plan, but
how do you know?
And I don't follow directions or plans very well.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll definitely see.
It's tough, isn't it? Sometimes those rules are just good for peace of mind in the moment. You know, like you graduate from teaching. You teach for you teach for 5 years. How old will you be?
Let's see. 27.
27. That's not very old.
No. Looking at the grand scheme of things, if I'm trying to live to be 80, that's maybe I have 50 more years.
Mm-hmm.
But how much of that do I want to spend in retirement? That's the real question. No, that's not a real question.
Do you want to retire?
I don't think I'll ever stop working.
Really?
I'll find something that'll be easier to do.
Okay.
Or something I like better that doesn't necessarily pay well, but if I have enough saved up, then why would it matter? I like doing things.
Amen to that.
I like being busy. Even when I complain about being tired or stressed, I'm glad that I'm actually doing something compared to sitting around doing nothing, feeling worthless.
Definitely. Do you ever think about do you have in mind like what you would do if you retired today and you were done teaching? What would you do what's that part-time gig?
I always say that I want to retire into barbering. Because that's not a really, for me at least, it doesn't seem like a hard thing to do. I'd need to get my license somehow, but I can figure out something through that. But it'd just be one of those easier jobs that people will pay for, and I'll be busy doing something that I enjoy. And I think that that's another thing. I don't want to be 60, 65, 70 and hate life because I'm not doing anything anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when do people retire? I really have no idea.
I
think
65, 66.
That seems like so early.
Yeah.
I think I'm being naive though, even as I say that.
I mean,
I'm
it depends.
19.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a lot of life. Maybe I'll be tired by then. But,
yeah.
Man. I don't know. That's hard to think that far ahead for sure. So, a big thing for our viewers,
our viewers, our listeners,
everybody who's seeing into this podcast, seeing into our hearts through our words here in the Backyard Barbecue podcast. Luke, this summer, was questioning going back to school, weren't you, Luke?
Yeah, seriously. I was seriously considering not even going back.
So, short synopsis. Why were you considering not going back? What were you going to do instead? And lessons learned from that experience going forward.
Well, was debating not going back because I thought that I just didn't want to be a teacher.
Good reason.
Yeah, but I had in my mind a realization that I hadn't done any actual teaching. So,
you know, that
kind of
hard to tell.
It's hard to tell when you haven't done it. So that's what I'm doing this semester with like my clinical experiences.
But you know what you had done? Cut hair.
I had cut hair. That was a long-term idea of what I would be doing if I hadn't gone back to school, but it definitely would not have been right away because I need to pay stuff off and be able to buy a car and all that stuff and pay for things because, you know, I'm an adult who has to pay for things. It just sneaks up behind you. It's like, hey, bills, how's it going? It's like, wow.
So you rewind a bit. So you thought about business, like you took something that you liked, and this is something that I think everybody who's questioning college or not college, some people don't question it. Go into college, once you get there, then you decide what you're going to do, and that's where the conflict is. What path should I choose? Some people, before they even get to college, are wondering whether they should or not. And sometimes the thing on the other end of that is I'll take this thing that I enjoy in my free time and try to make it into a business. And what was your, like, if you had a plan of how that would have gone out for you, what was it? What would that plan be? What would that plan B be?
The plan B would be I think I played with the idea of having a van and doing mobile haircuts.
Wow.
Which I think would be so much fun.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Logistically, I don't know how it would work. At least not right now. Because I don't even have a car yet. Like, I'm 20, I'm borrowing my sister's car for school. It's great. But I think if this whole teaching thing doesn't pan out like I expect it to, or at least I want to, at least for right now, that's the idea, that I want to be a teacher. If it comes to the point where I'm like, nope, not for me, then that's further down the road. But I think that the traveling barber van is something that I would definitely do. But I just have to think about it more.
Okay.
Figure it out.
To our viewers, I'm going to just call them the viewers. The Backyard Barbecue podcast, I refer to them as viewers, not listeners. To our viewers, if you're listening to this and you think that Luke's traveling barber van is a great idea, contact him whatever way you can. He's on Instagram. What's your Instagram?
Luke J. Schultz, no spaces.
Yep, that's his Instagram, Luke J. Schultz, no spaces. Please DM him and say, that's a fantastic idea, barbershop in a van. I whether it's an idea or not, 10 years from now when you're listening to this,
You're right.
I think that it's safe to say you'll make Luke's day. So please shoot him a DM only if you think that's a good idea. If you don't, keep it to yourself. Keep it to
Please.
yourself. We don't care.
I have Yeah.
Only positivity here. All right, we got a few minutes left. Not to the point of moments yet. I want to press in a little bit on this, if not just for selfish reasons, because I love the idea of you spreading your wings and flying into the barbershop sphere. And I also just have always had this like romanticized like the entrepreneur and the idea of taking something that you like and just making it your business. It just seems to me like a simple way to live, where what you love doing is also how you make money, and then you just wake up every day and be yourself.
Right.
You know? So why not? Why not really?
Why not?
Why not really? Because you mentioned that you can't make enough money to pay off your bills, quote unquote bills.
Right.
I'm doing air quotes here. What if you did a side job or like a full-time job?
Right.
And then you started building up this brand and getting your certification on the side.
Yeah. I don't know.
Is it possible?
Probably. I mean, yes, it's possible.
It's possible. That's just step one, though.
Yeah, it's finding the motivation to keep it going, because at the start of anything, whether it's a project or school or work, even just like a normal job, it's really hard to get the motivation to be like, all right, I gotta set aside time to do this, and I understand that it's gonna take time to get it to a point where it's good, or where I can profit off of it, or I can get a good grade on it, or whatever it is. You have to set that time aside in order for it to be good. You need to put the time in first in order to have a good outcome, and that's with a lot of things.
Yeah. School. I mean, you're doing it now.
Right.
For investment.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to think. Well, it's hard in general. It's hard to think.
Yeah.
But it's hard to put that much thought into, okay, I'm going to be doing this for this many years before I'm able to do this job that I created. You know? Like
creating it, yeah, that
like I'm in an economics class right now, and it's most of the things go over my head.
Right.
But
it's hard to think.
Right. It's hard to think. But there's no demand necessarily for a mobile barbershop. And I think a part of that time is figuring out how to, like, the time that you're setting aside, it's figuring out how to make demand. Like, I can supply a mobile barbershop, but who wants it?
Right.
And that's where that marketing stuff comes in, and that's where the time comes in, and more money and all that stuff. And you have to go back to, okay, I'm doing this job so I can leave this job to make this job. And yeah, I don't know. Decisions are hard.
It's hard.
It's hard. And I am terrible at making any decision, I feel. But that's another thing that is kind of cliche, I guess. It's something that a lot of people talk about but don't talk about.
Indecision?
About decision is just that a decision you make,
a real decision
like, that you make,
two answers could be right, and you have to decide.
Any decision that you make when it's at that large of a scale is the right decision.
Elaborate on that. I like that.
It doesn't matter whether you choose A or B, because it's at such a large scale that you're going to run with it either way.
Oh, yeah, I suppose you're right.
You're going to run with it either way, and if it crashes and burns, then you have that experience under your belt, and you can build from there.
Yeah.
It's not a one-way street. You can turn around. That's...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I like that perspective, because I was thinking when you were talking about teaching in your 5-year thing, that if you teach for 5 years, you're going to have a perspective that I will never have, because I haven't been a teacher for 5 years. And you're probably going to know things about like children, which is actually a really good way to like look into the minds of adults, I think, is knowing children, and communication and dealing with quote unquote clients, with parents and all the relationships you have to have there.
Right.
Like that's real life education. Period.
Yeah.
So when I'm excited about your barbershop, I'm not saying that I disrespect your decision at all to not go for that this year, because that's also a crazy decision. But I think that the two factors need to go into that decision for it to be, well, you say that it's always the right decision, but I think knowing what your passion actually is a really, really hard thing.
Yes, it is.
It really is. And I was just talking to you before we even drove over here to the KT, the Kwik Trip, that I've struggled in the past with always like picking a type of creativity and deciding like that was gonna be my thing, or picking a sport that's in my deeper past, or I don't know, a video game, or a school or a profession. Like I've got a laundry list, and I know you do too, just because we're very similar in our creativity and just in our minds. And you latch on to that thing and like, maybe that's my thing, but once you get older and start having to put weight in, like, well, can I make money with that? Is it worth my time? Time is so valuable. Like, what is your actual passion? I don't know. I tend to think you can't know until you really lean into it.
Yeah.
What is your passion, Luke?
What's my passion?
Yeah.
I don't know. I uncovered an idea. I don't know if it's an idea. I uncovered...
This sounds good.
Yeah, a part of me that I didn't realize before. This past summer, I was talking to one of our friends, Laura Gottschalk.
Shout out to Laura.
And it was during a conversation, during a meeting that we had, and I realized, I uncovered that I enjoy storytelling through different means. Whether that's a creative outlet towards like photography, videography, or through music, or through acting, or even just teaching. Like everything that I've been drawn to in my life has been a form of storytelling. And that's something that like is a weird concept to just like put out there. Like, what's your passion? Storytelling. I like telling stories.
Yeah.
But like, it's a much broader thing than people realize. So it's like, oh, you're passionate about talking about past experiences, making up past experiences, making up these stories about characters and stuff like that. Yeah, I am, but not just talking about it. I can tell a story through a picture. A picture's worth 1,000 words. That classic thing. Which I say that a picture doesn't need to be worth 1,000 words. It can be just one, and it can have meaning to one person because of what that represents.
Pause. Quotable quote right here. A picture doesn't need to be worth 1,000 words. It can be worth one. Is that a correct quote? Is
Yeah,
that what you said?
that is what I said.
It can be worth one word. You heard it here first. Okay, continue. Sorry, I interrupted you. You got to remember that. That's a gem here in the Backyard Barbecue podcast.
But the storytelling aspect in every facet of life that I have experienced and continue to experience, that's all that teaching is. You're telling the story of what they're supposed to be learning. In math, that's like harder to pull out the storytelling, but like you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that storytelling's probably my passion. And by any means possible, I will be able to do that by any means. That's not what I meant to say, but I want to do that in any and every capacity that I can.
You know what? I think you can. And when you say that, I think about so many teachers in my life where it's the important thing, of course, when you're in grade school, the course material is not what makes a teacher great. End of story.
Right.
It's just their ability to draw your attention.
Yep.
And what they do with that attention can really influence you, but whether you like them or not is probably just their ability to catch your attention and keep it. And I think that the greatest teachers can put a narrative in anything. By narrative, I'm referring to the storytelling aspect. But I see it all over the place. The thing my mind first pops to, and you're probably not going to recognize this, maybe somebody listening to this somehow knows, Gene Nagata is one of my favorite YouTube, like probably at this point my favorite, and his channel is called Potato Jet. And Potato Jet, the channel, if you haven't heard of it, guess right now as you're listening, what do you think that channel is about? Wrong. That channel is actually about mostly reviewing camera gear.
Huh.
Yeah. And it's really successful. It's not quite at 1 million, but it's pretty close to 1 million subscribers. And the reason I love it, I don't care. He reviewed like a cinema camera the other day. I'm never going to buy that. But it's so interesting because there's always a narrative. There's always a story. And it's so engaging. And I have maybe one professor right now who kind of does that. But I think a teacher, like in this new age of attentions that like are hard to grab, these kids that are going to have, like when you're a teacher, all these kids are going to be growing up with this amazing array of technology that they can have at their fingertips often and readily, and there's going to be all this new things to grab their attention, and being able to like take them on this journey.
Yeah, exactly. It's I get excited.
Is that exciting?
It is exciting. And
Luke's he's shaking. He's quivering.
I'm not.
With excitement.
But I am
foaming
excited.
at the lip.
Yep, that's it.
Chomping at the lip.
It is. It's a very exciting thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to see what it is that I'm passionate about in teaching, and when I'm done with teaching, whether that's the first year I do it or 20 years down the line, I can switch to something else that I can still tell stories through. So it's coming to a point. I'm 20. I'm only 20 years old, and I'm coming to the realization that it doesn't really matter what I'm doing next year or the year after that. It kind of, this kind of sounds cliche, but like, live today, tomorrow, the day after that, you'll figure it out. You'll find your way down plan A, plan B, plan C, F, whatever. You'll find your way to the right road, and you'll be good there, and you'll just keep going until it's done. And then what happens next? Who knows?
What happens next? Who knows? Wow, what a great thought to wrap up our first episode of the Backyard Barbecue Podcast, talking about Luke Schultz's journey all the way from that one suggestion, you should be a pastor, to now talking about the path that he's on, becoming a teacher, and all the reasons behind that. Hope you enjoyed, all our viewers, our first episode of the Backyard Barbecue Podcast. This will be airing every week, so tune in for the next episode. And Luke, any last words for the viewers?
Thanks, Laura.